going to be a really, really fun hour ahead. So thank you for joining us. It is such a pleasure and a privilege for me to be able to host and introduce two amazing women that I have known for a long time. First, our special guest of honor, Ambassador Capricia Penavic Marshall, a former colleague of mine, a dear friend for many years, and she has written a wonderful new book called Protocol: The Power of Diplomacy and How to Make It Work for You. Capricia, those of you who know her, know she brings an enormous amount of experience to the task of this book and to the subject matter. She was social secretary in the Clinton White House. She was US Chief of Protocol under President Obama. She currently is president of Global Engagement Strategies, which is an international consulting firm. She's ambassador in residence at the Atlantic Council. I would say each of those is the equivalent of a lifetime's worth of work. And now she can add one more title on her resume, and that is author. So Capricia, congratulations. The book is great. It's so much fun. It's so informative. And it's a great read. So I hope all of you have read it, and if you haven't, you will read it, and you will get many other people to read it. So welcome, and thank you for being here with us. Before I introduce our next guest, I want to just say that Capricia and I think, share at least two things in common, probably more, but at least two things. And those two things are, first, we both have sons named Cole, whom we dearly love, right? Yeah, and the second is that I know we each have enormous gratitude that we've had the privilege of working for and with Hillary Rodham Clinton over almost 3 decades now. I know I speak for Capricia in saying what an incredible mentor and teacher Secretary Clinton has been to each of us and to so many people who we have worked with over the years. And it's not often that I get the opportunity to thank you publicly, so thank you. And we're so happy to have you here. I normally would go through a long introduction, but everybody in the world thinks they know who she is. They think they know everything about her. Most of the time they're kind of off about a few things, but whatever. So I am going to use how you describe yourself to introduce you, which is as follows. This is from Twitter, her Twitter handle. 2016 Democratic nominee, sex state, senator, hair icon, mom, wife, grandma ×3, lawyer, advocate, fan of walks in the woods, and standing up for our democracy. I always have to add 2 more things. I just have to, with all due respect. The first is, and I know this is getting old and I say it over and over, but I'm going to say it again. Hillary Clinton won nearly 67 million votes in the 2016 presidential election. That would be 3 million more than the person currently occupying the White House. I will keep saying it. I will probably say it for decades, so forgive me, but I just can't help myself. And the second thing that I want to add to her self-resume is she is also an author. She's a best-selling author of, I've lost count, but I think it's 6 or 7 or 8 books now. And in fact, she has another one coming out, or it's actually just come out. And she'll be doing a PNP event with none other than her co-author, Chelsea Clinton, in a couple weeks. You can also sign up for that event and purchase that book. It's called Grandma's Gardens. You can find that in the chat as well. So congratulations on that, but mostly just thank you so very much for being with us tonight. Anybody who has spent more than 5 minutes or even just 5 minutes with Capricia knows that Capricia is an amazing, natural, incredible storyteller. And if you read her book, you will see the many, many stories she has to tell and her flair for telling them. And Secretary Clinton, you said in your Twitter feed a couple of days ago, you mentioned this event and you said, you know, Capricia has a lot of stories about me and I have a lot of stories about her. I just wanted to say, I don't think you really fully comprehend just how many stories she has about you. So tonight, you can tell us some of your stories about her and then you guys will be even. So I thought we should start with how you actually know each other. Capricia, you not only volunteered for the Clinton campaign like the first day practically, but you actually wanted to work for the spouse, not the candidate. And then you were on the campaign, you were one of the original members of Hillary Land, and then come the election, President Clinton won, and you really didn't think you were going to get a job offer in the White House, but you did. So can you tell us about how that happened?
Absolutely. First, let me say that I join you, Lissa, in saying to the Secretary, thank you. I too am so deeply grateful to your friendship, to your mentorship, to your leadership, to all of your ships. You have just been amazing to me and my family. I certainly wouldn't be sitting here today if it had not been for you. I am only too sad that we are separated by virtual space. It would be so much more fun if we were together. And you know how I love an audience. So I'm missing out on the reactions of the audience as well when I tell some of these very fun stories. Let me take you back to 1992. Actually, November of 1991, I first met then Governor Clinton in Cleveland, Ohio at an event, and I was taken. I thought, wow, he's really spectacular. And then I was offered an opportunity to join the campaign in Ohio, which I immediately did. And I did so because I thought, wow, he's really fascinating. And I watched this great VHS tape of him called the Covenant Speech. But I thought, this guy from Little Rock, Arkansas, not many people know him. The chances of him becoming president, probably not good, but his wife, top 100 woman lawyer, amazing. I'm going to learn from her. So I headed down to Little Rock, Arkansas, and in this huge hotel conference room, they said, for those who want to work for the candidate, step to this side of the room. And for those who want to work for his wife, go to that side of the room. And, you know, like 200 people went to the one side, and there were 5 of us that went to the other. And I was just like, I'm absolutely going to go out for her. I was sent out immediately on the road as an advanced person. And I was sent to Shreveport, Louisiana. I had never been there before either. And I was supposed to put together a day long of events. I got there and I was asked, you need to get a malt box. It's very important. I had no idea what a malt box was. They said, well, it makes a pretty picture. I'm like, well, I know how to make a pretty picture. No problem. So I stashed that away. I then went to the airport to go collect the First Lady of Arkansas, but I was sent the wrong information. I showed up at the all the dignitaries were there lined up, but I knew I had to dash her off to the first event. So we quickly made our way. I was driving her back in the day, and I think that she was like, slow down, lady. We get to each event that I had strategically planned until we get to the last event, which was a press. Instead, gathered all the microphones together, because a malt box gives you a pretty picture because you plug all the microphones into the malt box and you have one singular microphone. Instead, I put a big bow around all of the microphones, so she had a really pretty picture. She looks down at the bouquet, she looks up at me, and I thought, this was my first and last day. Well, her plane had a few hiccups, and we got to know one another and realized, you know, we have deep roots in the Midwest, shared that, shared a similarity in fathers, shared so many values. And I thought at that time immediately, I am attaching myself to this woman's coattails because it's going to be a great ride. And it was an amazing, amazing ride all the way through the White House, into the trail, on the campaign trail. We finished up. We had so much fun. We worked so hard every day. But what she taught me then, and which I took into all of my jobs, was preparation is key. Know your homework. Be prepared before you step into that job. And that worked for us on the campaign trail. It certainly worked for us when we were in the White House. I remember standing in the kitchen of the governor's mansion, and she said to me, I really want you to come and work for me in the White House. We're going to create this job. I think it's going to be a great job for you. Going to learn a lot. Would you like to do it? And within 2 seconds, I said, absolutely. Called my husband that I was married to for about 9.5 minutes. And I said, honey, we're leaving Cleveland and we're moving to Washington, D.C. And never looked back, never regretted a moment. It has been extraordinary. And just want to add this, is that if you're lucky, like I was early on in my career, to have someone who believes in you, who tells you to plant yourself where you can grow, who becomes your mentor, who invests in you like my mentor did, you are lucky for life, because I had that in Secretary Clinton.
Can I just follow up on that? So fast forward 4 years, you then are named social secretary. You were, I think, almost the youngest person ever to occupy that position, or close to it.
Close to it.
Close to it. But you were all of what, you know, I don't know, 28 or 9 or 30 or something, not very old for that job. But Secretary Clinton, you hired a young woman for that job. I mean, you hired her first to work in the White House, and then you hired her for this big giant job. So that's, you know, that's amazing. Can you talk a little bit about why you did that and what it was? You surrounded yourself with lots of women in the White House, of all ages, I might add, but especially a lot of young women who were super talented and got to do these amazing things.
Well, you know, Lisa, this is such a wonderful event for me to be with both of you, two people whom I obviously adore and respect, and who I've had the great privilege of working with now for many years. And I'm so proud of Capricia with this book, which is truly fabulous. And it's not just fabulous because she tells great stories about, you know, the White House and the State Department, and talks about diplomacy and what protocol means, but it's fabulous because a lot of the lessons can be applied in anybody's life. And I think that's what makes a really good nonfiction book. It's like, what can I learn, and what can I learn that I can apply to what I'm doing? And so when it became time to fill the social secretary position in the second term, you know, I just had seen Capricia in action. I'd seen how creative she was, innovative. I mean, tying the big bow around all the microphones was a little unusual, but it was creative. And all of the fun and adventures that we had in the campaign, and then into the White House with a lot going on all at once, she just became a critical member, not just of my staff, but of the larger White House staff, because she never met a stranger. She could literally, you know, talk to a potted plant and make the plant feel good and grow more. And so when I had to think about what makes for a good social secretary and why I thought Capricia would do such a good job, it was because of her love of people and her sense of adventure, and also her empathy and kindness. I mean, she never scored points on anybody. She was always trying to figure out how to help somebody. If she saw somebody in trouble, whether it was a colleague or literally a visitor to the White House, she would be the person who would immediately pick it up. And I think part of that is she's the daughter of two immigrants. Her mother's from Mexico. Her father was from Yugoslavia and Croatia. They both came here with nothing. They worked really hard, but she was put into a lot of different situations. And it just made perfect sense for me. And I asked her to be social secretary. I had to do a little bit of convincing. I think she was kind of surprised that I asked her to do that job, because it was a big leap. It looked like a big leap from the outside for people who didn't actually know Capricia. But she just took to it incredibly well. And we had a great time because it's not just the big events that you see that occasionally, you know, are in the paper or somehow covered at the White House. It's everything that goes on day to day that has any interaction with anybody from the outside. I mean, that is to a great extent the job of the social secretary, to smooth the way, to make people feel welcome. And she just did it superbly.
Well, and to match every event that happens in the White House, whether it's a tea with 3 people or, you know, 5,000 people on the South Lawn, with the agenda of that White House, right? So right. People think social and secretary, and they don't take it seriously. And it is honestly probably one of the most challenging jobs in the White House, I would say. Yeah. So, yeah, no, that's great. So I want to just, I had this in my lap. I meant to hold it up at the beginning. It's a
beautiful cover.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa, so much.
It's so great. So let's just get to brass tacks here. Capricia, what is protocol?
Oh my goodness. Well, I consider protocol a superpower. Protocol it starts the wheels of diplomacy. We in protocol, I consider us bridge builders. We lay out this very detailed roadmap for whatever interaction, big or small, for our world leaders. And it's the bringing together of all of these details, the nuances of the engagement to create a major impact. That is what protocol does.
And Madam Secretary, you have been, I would say, one of the finest unofficial diplomats our country has ever had in your 8 years as First Lady and as a senator. And then you became the nation's top diplomat. So what is diplomacy and how do the two, in your mind, fit together?
You know, diplomacy is the sum of the activities and the skills that are brought to bear on dealing between and among foreign nations. It's also dealing with people on a day-to-day basis. So you've got maybe big D diplomacy that a Secretary of State's engaged in with foreign leaders and the kind of interests that the United States has abroad. And then you've got small d diplomacy, which are really the ways that you deal with sensitive issues and sensitive people in every kind of setting. And I think of protocol as really the lifeblood of diplomacy. The protocol officers and their extraordinary dedication to their jobs means that somebody's there ahead of you. Somebody's trying to figure out what are the bumps in the road we might have to avoid? What are the problems that might not have been in that brief that you got from a lot of the experts in the region or who have in-country experience that are now obvious because you're trying to do something as simple as determining who sits at a table, but it becomes incredibly difficult because people are being told, no, not that person, somebody else, which wasn't in the brief. And so the protocol that I saw enacted, both as a First Lady and then obviously a Senator and most particularly Secretary of State, was essential to the role of diplomats and really the art of diplomacy.
Madam Secretary, I'm sure you'll remember fondly the G20 in Mexico.
Fondly's not the word I would use.
Yes. Well, it was our first engagement with President Putin as president.
Well, he had come back. Yeah, that's right.
He had come back. And so we had all of the protocol officers that were there, the team, we learned from your team, all of the details of that agenda and went to work immediately on putting together every bit of that engagement, from the greeting down to the room, down to the size of the room. And we wanted to make sure that he felt really pressured to talk to you, that he didn't think that he could sort of move back and had some space. And so we put him into that really tight room. And I do remember greeting him and bringing him down, and President Obama was standing in front of you when he was greeting during the initial greet. And then he stepped aside to unveil you. And there was this moment in President Putin's eyes that was just like, whoa. And just that hint of surprise. And that also is a little bit of mindset of diplomacy. You want to catch them. We're putting you in the best position, but we're also trying to make sure that, we're leaning it all in our favor. And, from the room size to the mindset to all aspects of that engagement, we really pivoted the power in the direction of the U.S. And in the end, felt like we certainly walked out with the advantage.
Well, it was so interesting that you mentioned that as an example, Capricia, because we all know that I'm not Vladimir Putin's favorite person. That was pretty evident in 2016, in part because I did my job as Secretary of State, and as Secretary of State, standing up for democracy, standing up for free and fair elections is part of the American brand, or at least it used to be. And so when Putin announced that he was going to return as president, and Medvedev, who had been president at his sufferance, was going to return to be prime minister. And then they held elections that were extraordinarily clumsily, meddled with. And I spoke out about that. And then there were huge demonstrations in the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg and a few other places, which somehow, Putin blamed me for. So I had not seen him. We fast forward to him actually having once again officially become president for that meeting at the G20 held in Mexico. And he was 45 minutes late. The protocol was that it was our turn to host. And I remember so well waiting for him, sitting on a wall in that beautiful resort where we stayed with President Obama, just kind of gaming out, okay, he's deliberately doing it. This is not an accident. He's breaching protocol. He's going to arrive late. He wants to have the advantage of having made us wait, made President Obama wait. So what are we going to do? And how are we going to handle that? And, that's the kind of thinking, almost strategizing, if you will, that protocol can play a part in. So I think it's a really good example, Capricia.
Yeah, I mean, Capricia, you talk so much in the book about cultural IQ. You talk about venue IQ, which you're just discussing now. You talk about, timing, and every single little thing is a statement of something, either of respect or understanding or outreach or hostility and contempt or whatever. And you say in the book that President Obama had special reverence for Secretary Clinton's, his Secretary of State's venue IQ and cultural IQ. You may not know this, but she does talk about this in the book. And one of the things that I found really interesting, you talk a lot about rooms and lighting and size and spacing and all that stuff, but also, and I had never thought about this before, how important the outside world can be, being in the natural world can be to diplomacy and also in issues of protocol. And I know you both have thought a lot about that. So, I'd love to hear, I'm sure everybody else would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for that. I quickly just want to say that what I loved most about my job, or one of the aspects of my position as chief of protocol that I enjoyed so very, very much, was watching the exchange between Secretary Clinton and President Obama. When they were at the bilateral table, it was almost like you were watching an exquisitely executed ballet taking place, and their opponents never knew where they were going to go next, but they were in sync with one another. It was really extraordinary. And I don't know that if I've ever told you this story, Madam Secretary, but when there was one holiday when you weren't able to show up and because you had injured yourself. And so President Obama was showing up in your stead, and I just gotten off the phone with you. And so I relayed to him how grateful you were. And he looked at me and he said, "She's my friend. I love my friend. I want to take care of my friend." And I just thought that moment was so sweet, and the wonderful. And so to be working for diplomats and a president, a Secretary of State, and leadership like that was so rare and wonderful. But the secretary always has understood the importance of indoor, outdoor, what a venue can offer you, and an advantage, or can set a mood, can create an environment. From the White House South grounds when we were there, or when we traveled abroad and we went on so many wonderful trips. When we went to Lahore, Pakistan, and we went to that extraordinary venue with Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto. It was just amazing what she had set out for us, in particular because we were also all dressed in appropriate attire, but down to the candlelights that were there. And it brings you into the desired feeling that the person who has created the event is intending. And the secretary was just, so smart at it. So yes, President Obama was always deferring to her on venue selection, whether it was hosting Angela Merkel at 1789, or perhaps it was going on a walk with President Karzai in Dumbarton Oaks. All of those incredibly effective tools in diplomacy.
Well, I really believe that, nations act in their own interests. Let's just be clear about that, but building relationships between and among leaders, and not just at the top, but all the way down deep into a government where people know their counterparts, where problems can be solved or avoided without blowing up and becoming a huge international incident, are part of the goal of protocol and obviously of diplomacy. And setting the right tone, finding the right venue is a way of showing respect. You know, I think about the two things we did, Capricia. One, when we had the really beautiful outdoor dinner in Hawaii for the Chinese foreign minister and also state counselor on foreign affairs, it showed respect to find a beautiful setting where you couldn't help but relax. You weren't, you know, stuck in, you know, some little windowless room with a, you know, meal in front of you. You wanted to spend time with each other. And, you know, that helped us later on when we ran into some challenges. And I think about that walk with President Karzai. You know, he was always a challenging, as we say in diplomacy, interlocutor, big word for saying counterpart, somebody who, you know, really marched to the beat of his own drum. And it was rooted in his heritage and his personal experience and his understanding of his country and how he was trying to keep it together against the Taliban and against outside interests. And so taking him to Dumbarton Oaks, you know, literally having tea with him, walking through the gardens with him, you know, you can almost see the shoulders of leaders begin to relax. And, you know, all of a sudden you're talking about, you know, personal matters, and you're seeing a bit more about who this is, not just the positions that he, you know, recites at a meeting, but what he feels, where he comes from, what he's trying to do. And the venue really matters. And it was something that I think Americans don't always understand the importance of. Oftentimes when you go to other countries, or again, I'm speaking for, you know, the pre-current era, the other countries are much more sensitive to the atmospherics about what protocol can bring to the literal table to try to create a better rapport. And sometimes in America, it's like, okay, fine, you know, let's have the meeting, let's go down the agenda, let's get to the point. And I think we sometimes lose some of the advantage and the opportunities that we would otherwise have. Again, it's not going to change people's fundamental interests, but there's a lot of room on the margins about what can be accomplished or what can be smoothed along the way, or to send an even stronger message, which can be delivered in some ways more effectively after you've created a better atmosphere, so that you can then, you know, take advantage of that moment.
So let's talk for a second about another thing that matters in protocol and diplomacy that Capricia talks a lot about in her book, and that is food. Madam Secretary, I think anybody who's worked for you knows that you are a proponent and champion of smart power, of using all the tools in the toolkit. And Capricia has some amazing stories and actually great insights about why food becomes such an important and key ingredient in diplomatic relationship building, in protocol situations, and also, by the way, a huge challenge. So I just want to say, when you were First Lady, you understood the power of food to communicate a message, and you replaced French cuisine, which the White House had been serving forever, for decades, with farm-to-table American cuisine, American purveyors, and that made an enormous statement. Capricia, both as social secretary and then, of course, as chief of protocol, you had to deal with food issues all the time. And you write in your book about one, which I will just summarize as, I still have nightmares about the hummus. And the other is the noodle story. And once you talk about those two, then I have to go back to the secretary, because I have to ask her about two food-related protocol challenges that I personally am very familiar with. So,
well, Lisa, thank you for remembering that initial moment. It was the selection of the chef that impressed upon me so very much the importance of food in our in government, in all of our government exchanges, in all of our government interactions. You know, I grew up in a household that, as the secretary noted, was a mix. It was like the UN. We served so many different types of food. And so I had a real appreciation for that. But when the secretary really focused on, you know, we need to bring in an American chef and start to serve food that is more in tune with our country, that really stuck with me. So when I became chief of protocol, we launched a culinary diplomacy program, and was really excited about that. I'll tell you very, very quickly the story associated with it. It was very early on in the administration, and we were at a bilateral luncheon that we were hosting for the secretary on the 8th floor at the State Department. I always like to kind of blend into the wall and just watch how everything is happening when a luncheon begins. So the main course was put down, and all the secretary had to do was, she looked down at it, she glanced up at me, she looked back down at it, and I got it immediately. We can do better. Let's do better. I raced back to the office and I sat with the team, and we all came up with then culinary diplomacy, which was enormously effective. Enormously effective. It was really, really wonderful. The noodle story is you know, a wonderful story because it shows, you know, respect for someone else's culture. And, you know, it was our first trip to China. President Obama was invited by President Hu Jintao to a state visit. We were at the Diatai, at this very private dinner. And I was approached by my counterpart, who came up to me very eagerly and stated, Ambassador Marshall, President Hu would like President Obama to make a noodle. And I said, I'm so sorry. And he explained to me it was important, and this was part of their culture, the tradition. And I said, I decided, okay, this is important. I need to go and ask the president to make a noodle. I walked over, whispered in President Obama's ear, President Hu would now like you to make, and I quote, a noodle. And he said, he looked up at me with this look that I get to know super well throughout the years, like, what? But he didn't say a thing. He just looked at me and he goes, okay, let's make a noodle. And they stood shoulder to shoulder, and they had a big lump of dough between the two of them, and they started bouncing it, and more members of the delegation came and stood beside them. And it wasn't Americans any longer on one side of the table and Chinese on the other. It was everyone in one line, showing respect for this very important cultural ritual. And it was, again, another moment in which the relationship grew. Very important moment, I think, in U.S.-China relations.
Well, speaking of respect and following protocol, Secretary Clinton, you have, I can think of at least 2 incidents where, as you would say, the things I have eaten for my country. And I'm just going to say 2 things, and you can talk about both of them or either of them. One is fermented mare's milk.
Oh, yeah.
And the other is moose lips.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, after Lissa was with me in Beijing for the speech I gave at the UN World's Conference, we visited Mongolia, and Mongolia was and is a critically situated country. And it is a place that is pretty much surrounded by Russia and China. And it was important that we thought we would, you know, pay attention to Mongolia, to their, you know, post-Soviet life and efforts at democracy and all of that. So we go. And of course, we have a lot of meetings and the rest. But part of our diplomatic mission was to go outside Ulaanbaatar, the capital, and visit a family of nomadic herders. And it was a way of showing respect to the fundamental cultural reality of the lives of, you know, a great many Mongolians at that time. And so off we go to the yurt, the ger. It's just different words for the same thing. It's, you know, the home that is packable and movable that the herders lived in. And we were in the the home of this family and having a conversation through an interpreter. And the wife, a relatively young woman, came forward with a bowl of kind of foaming white something. And I looked and offered it to me, and I took it, and I'm sort of looking around, and luckily someone says, "Oh, this is fresh from the mare," because, this young woman, the wife, got up every day very early and she milked the mares. And I was sitting there and I was thinking, okay. And obviously I had to show respect. I'd come all this way to show respect and support for the people of Mongolia. So I lifted it to my lips and I took a sip of it, and it really tasted like yogurt that had been out for, a week or so, fermenting. Okay, so I did it, fine. Then we get back on the airplane to fly back to the United States. I'm first lady and on long foreign trips. Usually a doctor from the White House physician's office travels with you. So the doctor with us comes up and he goes, "Well, ma'am, we're going to have to watch you for at least 2 weeks." I said, "What? Watch me for what?" And he said, "Well, there's a disease. It's a cattle disease called brucellosis. And it's prevalent over here, and it can be transmitted to humans." So I'm sitting there thinking, and nobody told me this beforehand. Nobody said, maybe you'd better be a little reluctant to drink the mare's milk, even though it might be a breach of protocol. But luckily, I don't know, maybe it did affect me, and I've been living with it for all these years, and with all the ways that are obvious. But I don't think it did, but it's the kind of example that you think of, like, well, what do you do? And well, what you try to do is be respectful. And fast forward toward the last dinner in Moscow with then Boris Yeltsin, who was the outgoing president. We were having dinner in the Kremlin. I was at the head table, next to President Yeltsin. My husband was on the other side. We're having this magnificent many-course meal. And President Yeltsin leans over and he goes, "I have a special surprise for you." And I said, "Well, what is it?" He goes, "Wait till you see." So next thing I know, a bowl is put in front of me and a bowl is put in front of President Yeltsin. And floating in the bowl is something that looks like rubber bands. I had no idea what that was. And again, President Yeltsin is like putting his spoon in and really drinking this soup with gusto. Okay, so, I put my spoon in and in goes whatever the rubber band is, and it's really, really hard to chew. And I said, exactly what is this, President Yeltsin? He goes, "Delicacy, moose lip soup." So I thought, oh man, the things that I have eaten for my country.
And you're still here, miraculously.
Miraculously for many years.
I thought the doctor traveling to Mongolia with us actually was going to have a heart attack on the spot if you lifted that thing to your mouth. It was so funny. I'm going to take a couple quick questions from the audience, and your old friend, Kaki Hockersmith, has a question. Capricia. She says, "Considering your long-standing and close working relationship with Hillary, how did you go about winning the trust of President Obama in your role as his chief of protocol?"
Oh, well, I owe that all to Madam Secretary. When she was offered the position as Secretary of State, she immediately stepped up for me and went to President Obama and said, "I know exactly who should be your chief of protocol. She knows the job. She has worked in government before, and she will advise you well." And she really pushed quite a bit on that. It wasn't an easy go for me to get the position, as now well documented. But in the end, I think that he was, I want to say that, of course he found me fabulous and he loved me, right? But it was because it was her advice that really made him feel like I was the right choice. And then getting right down to work. And, you know, those first few visits, like we're talking about, making sure that he was incredibly prepared for it, making sure that he knew that we had done our research, making sure that he knew that we had his back in every single one of those exchanges.
Yeah, no, it's and people always think there was so much more tension than there was. You know, people forget what it actually means to be a public servant and want to serve your country and work with other people who want to serve their country. And, you know, thank goodness for people like all of you who have done that so beautifully. So somebody asked,
Oh my gosh, wow. You know, we used to have state dinners. we had a lot of state dinners in the 90s when I was fortunate enough to live in the White House. We had a lot of state dinners in the Obama administration. Think about it, but we tried to have geographically diverse state dinners. We tried to have big country, the friendship and alliances of smaller countries with the United States. So we really did try to, you know, pretty much have a global perspective on state dinners.
So I would have to say, Madam Secretary, that you really wish you had one for Croatia.
Yeah, of course.
Because my dad would have been so happy.
So we'll take some more audience questions in a sec. There are two other kind of big ticket things I think we should cover. There are things that Capricia talks a lot about in her book. They're sort of the deeper themes of the book that go along with all these amazing stories. And there are things I know you care about deeply as well. One is this whole chapter at the end of the book called Negotiating While Female. And Capricia, you say women are almost constantly in a state of negotiation, whether they're in a state of negotiation officially or not. And I'd love to hear, you know, your thoughts about that. Obviously, Secretary Clinton, you have experienced this, I would say, exponentially more in almost every facet of your existence than all the rest of us combined. And double standards and, you know, the realities of sexism that you just have to deal with as a diplomat. So maybe you could each talk a little bit about that. And then the other thing is, I do think we should talk about, you know, just the tenor of diplomacy and protocol today, which has unfortunately gone in a very, very poor direction downhill. So,
yeah, Capricia, start with what you wrote about in your book, because it's very interesting.
Well, thank you. This was a special chapter for me. It wasn't initially part of the plan. I wrote, of course, the book for everyone, but then once I finished, I realized, you know, as a woman, these tools are often applied very differently. And I feel as though I need to help women understand how sometimes the norms are not quite applicable in the same way for your gender. So I took a lot of time thinking about how, as a woman, as a former diplomat, how I had to navigate some of these pitfalls so that I would avoid them and make sure that I was still coming out in the end successful in any one of my engagements. And I just very quickly will say that there are a few pointers that I make to help women. One in particular is your how to raise your cultural gender IQ. It's really important to understand as you're traveling the world that not everyone sees women in the same way that they do here. And as a matter of fact, thinking about that, as I stated, even in the United States, women are certainly not seen as an equal, as we well know. But knowing those differences as you travel the world are really, really important. You know, and how do you subvert being a token person? You know, you don't want to be a woman who's taken out of a binder of women. You want to make sure that you actually have value and that they know your value, but don't also, you know, delegate away opportunities. Make sure that when you are offered to be the moderator of the panel, say, well, I'm not going to be the moderator. Take the moderator position. Gives you an opportunity to voice your opinion, to stand your ground, to control the conversation. That's also really important. Learn how to network better. Women do not understand the value of creating a vast network. It's so incredibly important. The secretary taught that to us very early on, encouraging us when we first got into the White House, because you can be very insular. She's like, no, I want you guys to get out into the community when you're given an invitation, get out there, learn how to work a cocktail party. Ann Stock was brilliant at it. She taught me how to make sure that you had a strategy before you walked in that door. So there's a whole host of techniques and tools that I give in this section, and so many of them are based upon my interactions and, of course, the time that I spent with the secretary. There's one other one that I do want to share. Sorry, it's the we had complained a bit, us women, when we were in the White House, about not being heard when we were in meetings. And even though in the Clinton White House, there were quite a few women at very senior level positions. And I remember this at a scheduling meeting, a bit of us, were complaining about this. And Secretary said, well, when the two of you are in the same room at the same meeting, just repeat what the other one says. And I said, well, okay. And she's like, okay, so Capricia, if Kelly says something and you think it's important, repeat what Kelly says so everybody hears it, because oftentimes women really are not heard. And you have to make sure that they hear you. And so we got into the habit of then, echoing what the other person said to make sure everyone at the table heard their voice. And that was something that I repeat again and again to young women as they're making their way throughout their careers.
Can I ask you, Madam Secretary, to weave into your answer about negotiating as a woman and being in this world as a woman, to maybe talk a little bit about mentorship, because we have a couple of questions from women who want to know what you would advise about pursuing a career, both and Capricia too, in protocol, but also in public service. And one of the things that you did was you created a critical mass of women who had to be taken seriously, and that had in the White House, and that had never really happened before in the way that you've sort of formalized it. And obviously that's been important to you all along. It's the reason Capricia and I and others have been able to do the things we've done in our careers. So how important is having these critical masses of women in these different settings? And often in diplomacy, you don't.
Well, it's obviously critical, and you have to try to get more women at the table. One of my favorite political figures in modern American history is Shirley Chisholm, and she has that great saying, like, demand a seat at the table, and if they don't give you a seat, bring a folding chair. I mean, you have to figure out how to be heard and to participate and contribute to whatever, the conversation might be. And I just want to underscore what Capricia said. I found it really interesting to serve as Secretary of State. I'd had two women predecessors, obviously, with Madeleine Albright being our first woman Secretary of State, and then Condi Rice, who immediately preceded me. And when you're representing the United States, you're treated differently because people know you're coming with the with the imprimatur of whoever the president is. The president has selected you to be Secretary of State. You're carrying messages of the administration you serve. And so there's not as much at the very top of the kind of double standard and overt sexism that you can find, a level and 2 and 3 below, or that I certainly found in the political world. And that's fascinating. So, I would go to Arab Gulf states. I would be the only woman, not only the only woman in the meeting, but the only woman anywhere to be seen, because, all the servers were men, all of the, security were men. So I would be very conscious of that. But I worked to create a, respectful relationship that was premised on, who we were representing and what we were there to do, and was treated, personally in a reciprocal way. I also found it fascinating when I would occasionally get glimpses from kind of behind the scenes about how some of the foreign leaders, thought about dealing with a woman Secretary of State. So when I represented our country going to Myanmar, which was trying to open up, and the military generals were taking their uniforms off and putting on civilian clothes. They were the same people, but they were now serving in civilian office. And I went to the first meeting that the United States had had since, I think, John Foster Dulles with the foreign minister of Myanmar, formerly Burma. And I walk in and the foreign minister's there and one of his top assistants, who's an older man, and then two really young women at the table. And I was thinking, wow, that's terrific. And so the foreign minister said, well, we know you would like to see women, so we've invited these two women to be at the table. It was kind of, touching in a way, but maybe it also was a recognition that they needed to start thinking about doing things differently. I have a million stories like that. Just one other quick one. I show up to visit as Secretary of State with the Prime Minister of Bulgaria. And it was one of those, not so good hair days. And so I sort of pulled my hair back into, good old fashioned ponytail bun. And I walk in, I sit down and he's just staring at me. And I said, Your Excellency, is there something wrong if we come late or somehow other not met your expectations? He goes, no, I heard when you have your hair pulled back, you're not in a good mood. I said, well, that's absolutely nothing to do with the mood I'm in. It was just like, I've been traveling a lot and this is the best I could do with my hair. So anything you can do to break the ice as a woman, to inject some humor, to try to make the other side feel a little bit more relaxed and at ease, you can get the official professional relationship on a stronger footing. And a word about mentorship. I wouldn't be sitting here without mentors. One of my great mentors was Marian Wright Edelman, who I worked for as an intern when I was in law school, that I went to work for right out of law school, that I served on the board of the Children's Defense Fund with. And, just her passion and her, deep, profound commitment to helping children overcome neglect and poverty and racism and mistreatment of all kinds was incredibly determinative about how I saw the world and what I wanted to do in it. And so find people. They don't all have to always be women. I had some great men mentors as well, but find somebody who is willing to take you on and advise you and offer constructive criticism, because there's always more to learn, and you want somebody who has your best interests at heart to be conveying advice to you.
And if I could just add to that, Lisa, very quickly, sorry, is that be a good mentee as well. Be hungry, seek out opportunities, speak up, take on the extra job. Make sure that that your mentor, that you are investing in all that they are giving you.
No, good point, Capricia, both of you. Believe it or not, we are literally a couple minutes away from having to end. So I'm really sorry about that. There's one question that is, how would you convince somebody who thinks that etiquette and protocol is just pomp and circumstance and niceties? My answer is read Capricia's book, and you will have the actual theory of the case that totally answers your question. So we're not going to answer it here at this moment. But the one thing, and if you could do the lightning round, just quick summary before we end, because it's really been on my mind. I know it's been on Capricia's mind. I'm sure it's been on your mind, Madam Secretary, is we are in a state right now of such intense coarseness of our culture and our discourse, where respect, where means, doesn't seem to matter, mean-spiritedness takes the day. And you talk a lot, Capricia, about the importance of empathy and humility and collaboration. I know that those things very much guided you, both as First Lady and as Secretary of State and as Senator. What are we going to do? I mean, can we regain this sense that we have an obligation to be respectful and to have sort of dignity in the way we conduct our relationships with other countries and other people?
Well, I'll just quickly say that yes, we can. We can absolutely do that, because we are a nation that believes in civility. and respect. And I was blessed, as you were, Lissa, to work for leadership that understood that. That they led with their heart, that they put themselves in the position of those that they were serving, and they know that that's a very effective way in creating collaborations to get the united people together so that they can move forward as a nation. Secretary Clinton was brilliant at this, as First Lady, as Senator, and then of course as our top diplomat. And so I would love for her to take the last word here in our session.
Well, I really just want to echo what Capricia said, and I want to start by making this point. You know, being polite, following etiquette, being concerned about protocol does not make you politically correct. It makes you empathetic and understanding, and it actually opens up greater opportunities to achieve the goals that you are seeking. You know, the old silly saying, you get more with honey than vinegar. Clearly, how we interact with each other is a reflection of whether we respect each other, whether we're willing to listen to each other, whether we even care about each other. And, you know, for me, it's got to be rebuilt from the bottom up, as well as the top down, where you see examples and models. And I think losing that is not just sad, I think it's profoundly dangerous. You know, if you don't prepare for meetings, you don't follow protocol when you are being introduced to someone or you are interacting with someone, you have very little certainty about what's going to happen next. And that might make good reality TV, but it doesn't make good diplomacy, and it doesn't make for solid, stable relationships. And part of the challenge we're facing right now is that, you know, contrary to what Abraham Lincoln, you know, taught us, that, you know, might does not make right. There are some who think leadership is all a display of, you know, strength and boisterousness and bullying and dominance and insulting, and you know, they disdain the kind of conversation we're having tonight. They hold contempt for talking about, you know, doing things the right way. They're going to throw everything up in the air and, you know, start all over again and all of that. Well, it hasn't gotten very far. As far as I know, North Korea still has nuclear weapons, despite breaching protocol and going trotting off around the world to meet with Kim Jong-un for no good outcome. Vladimir Putin seems to just keep getting his way. The Chinese are, you know, going to take over Hong Kong. I mean, you know, we could go down the list. And so where does all of that bluster and performance actually get us? When if you prepare, and I know I'm often accused of being overprepared, I happen to think that's a virtue, not a vice. But if you prepare and you put yourself in the shoes of the other person, no matter how much you may disagree with that other person, you can come up with strategies that can perhaps push your goals forward because you're alert to the movements, the nuance, the conversation, the openings that are occurring. And I think protocol, as Capricia brilliantly portrays it in this book, is not just at the big high level of international relations, when the meeting finally comes together and you see whether or not something will come of it. It's all the steps of preparation, and it is the imagining of what will further our national interest, make our leaders be, you know, able to achieve their goals, because everything has been thought through and planned in a way that looks seamless and looks easy when you're not in the office and, you know, 20 hours a day. But it's also true in real life. how do we expect to get along with each other? How do we expect to trust each other? How do we expect to deal with a public health tragedy, an economic collapse, a terrible moment of moral reckoning about systemic racism, if we can't find ways to interact in an appropriate, peaceful, empathetic, respectful way? And so I'm obviously very proud of Capricia, but I think this book is really a great lesson book. And I wish, that people will read it and think about not only what needs to happen, hopefully in the next administration in our own country, but also what can happen in our everyday interactions.
Well, it's certainly, Capricia, and both of you, is so refreshing is not strong enough a word, but I'll use it for now, to have people in your positions who are celebrating empathy and humility and collaboration and cooperation. We just have to keep pressing ahead. Those are virtues, and so is preparation, as you said. And I wish we could go on. We have more questions. The comments are just so appreciative of you both for your service and leadership and for doing this event tonight. I just want to say thank you both for being such incredible models of public service and patriotism. I mean, you epitomize what American patriotism really is. We need to remind people that this is what true patriotism looks like. So thank you both for doing this for PNP. Everybody, remember to sign up for Grandma's Gardens, July 7th at 4 p.m. You get 2 doses of Secretary Clinton in a couple of weeks. We feel very, very lucky at PNP for that. But honestly, thank you both from the bottom of my heart. Thank you all who are watching. Thank you for your support of our store. We need it. We appreciate it. And we hope you all stay safe, stay well, and stay well read.
Great. Thank you, Lissa.
Thank you. Thank you, Lissa. Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Take care, everybody.
Good night, everyone.